So just imagine that you are at work or at school or maybe even in your own home, and you have been doing a project, and you've started this project, and now you are close to finishing it. But time is running out. And do you have the resolve to finish it? Or will you be carried off by distractions of other things that seem to be important in that moment? Will you be carried off into the opposition in criticism as people look at what you've done and say, well, that's not good enough? Or are you sure that that's what you were supposed to be doing in the first place? Distractions. And shall we just admit it, a lot of those distractions are people. People who sometimes well-meaning, sometimes just downright sinister, who just get in the way of what it is that we are supposed to be doing, what we've set our minds to do. And the question then becomes, will you persevere through this time, and will you finish? Finish well, finish strong, that which you start. And that's what our story is leading us about today. Nehemiah, we've been in this sermon series for the last 6 weeks, and we've come to chapter 6, and Nehemiah set out to do this great work for God by going from Susa to Jerusalem, which is no short trip, with a clear vision and goal to restore that city to its former glory, to find what was broken and restore it, and through that, hopefully restore a national identity of a people who had lost who they are. Nehemiah is about to lead this people to finish what they started. But guess what? Right as there's light at the end of the tunnel, right when that time when it's about to be a celebration because they lay that last brick, they set that last gate, opposition returns. Sanballat and Tobiah. We've met them several times in the book of Nehemiah. We met them back in the chapter 2. We find out that Sanballat is the governor of Samaria, which is just to the north of Judah. Sanballat has a lot of power, and now he's kind of lorded that over this region. But now we have Nehemiah coming and wanting to build up Jerusalem. Knowing the history of Jerusalem and how amazing that city is, Sanballat knows that as soon as that city is restored and there's a governor over it, he will have no power in there anymore. So he opposes it. Then we have his good buddy Tobiah. Ironically, Tobiah means God is good in Hebrew. But Tobiah is not a good person. In fact, he's one of the ones, and he will continue, even when Sanballat gives up, he will continue to oppose. They didn't like what Nehemiah was doing. They didn't like what the people were doing. So in chapter 4, they come and they have a little bit more of a general opposition. They try to intimidate the people. They try to get them to feel like that there's danger, and if they would just run and hide. See, all they want is for the work to stop. They know that the more they get closer to finishing, the more people see the finish line and they restore their resolve. It's kind of like when you're in a marathon and you're running and you get to mile 20 and you feel like, man, it is just I can't go on anymore. But there's one thing, when you hear the roar of the crowd at the finish line, it gives you the resolve to keep going and to finish. Sanballat and Tobiah want to make sure that they don't hear the crowds, that hopefully they will be able to thwart them before they get any further. So now what do? They're not so much interested in telling the people to stop or intimidating the people. Now they turn full force on their leader. And it is now the leader of this people that will be the target of their opposition. It will be Nehemiah himself. Nehemiah has been shouldering a great weight on his shoulders. You know he's weary. It's been a hard few months, maybe even over a year. But as they've done this wall over the last month or so, it's got to be tough to keep going. So they target their criticism, their attacks on Nehemiah. And Nehemiah has a choice to make. Will he restore his resolve to keep going, to lead this people, or will he buckle under the pressure? And what we learn here in this from Nehemiah, and Nehemiah is not playing anybody's games. He's going to finish this. But in order for him to finish it, he needs to avoid some distractions and ignore some people. Sanballat and Tobiah, he's not even going to deal with them. So really our big idea this morning is avoid distractions and focus on finishing the task at hand. It's so easy to start something, but sometimes it's difficult to finish it. And Nehemiah has to finish. This is not a project that can go unfinished. It can't get to the point where it is good enough. They have to finish it. So we pick up the story of Nehemiah and the building of the wall in chapter 6, verse 1. So if you have your Bibles, go ahead and turn there. We're going to read verses 1 through 14 first, because that makes up our first point, and then we will finish out 15 through 19. So really, there's 2 points this Sunday, just 2 points that we will focus on. But chapter 6, verses 1 through 14. Now when Sanballat and Tobiah and Geshem the Arab and the rest of our enemies heard that I had built the wall and that there was no breach left in it, although up to that time I had not set up the doors and the gates, Sanballat and Geshem sent to me, saying, "Come, let us meet together at Hakaphirim in the plain of Ono." But they intended to do me harm. And I sent messengers to them, saying, "I am doing a great work, and I cannot come down. Why should the work stop while I leave it and come down to you?" And they sent to me 4 times in this way, and I answered them in the same manner. In the same way, Sanballat, for the 5th time, sent his servant to me with an open letter in his hand. And it was written, "It is reported among the nations," and Geshem also says it, "that you and the Jews intend to rebel. That is why you are building the wall, and according to these reports, you wish to become their king. And you have also set up prophets to proclaim concerning you in Jerusalem, 'There is a king in Judah,' and now the king will hear all of these reports. So now let us come and take counsel together." Then I sent to him, saying, "No such thing as you say have been done, for you are inventing them out in your own mind." For they all wanted to frighten us, thinking their hands will drop from the work, and it will not be done. But now, O God, strengthen my hands. Now I went into the house of Shemaiah, the son of Delaiah, son of Mehetabel, who was confined to his home. He said, "Let us meet together in the house of God within the temple. Let us close the doors of the temple, for they are coming to kill you. They are coming to kill you by night." But I said, "Should such a man as I run away? And what man such as I could go into the temple and live? I will not go in." And I understood and saw that God had not sent him, but he was pronounced the prophecy against me, because Tobiah and Sanballat had hired him. For the purpose he was hired, that I should be afraid and act in this way in sin. And so they could give me a bad name in order to taunt me. Remember Tobiah and Sanballat, O my God, according to these things that they did. And also the prophetess Noadiah and the rest of the prophets who wanted to make me afraid. It's an interesting story that we find here, where they really lay in pretty harshly on Nehemiah. There's a couple different tactics that they use in order to kind of get at him and get him to stop the work, because really that's all at this point they want to do. If they can get Nehemiah to stop, then the rest of the people will stop as well. Kind of like strike the head and the body will die. And that's what they want to do. They just want some doubt to creep in. So Nehemiah has to make a choice. Is he going to give in? Is he going to crack? But that's not what he does at all. In fact, and our first point is, he resolves to persevere. He resolves to persevere. He restores his resolve. He's almost done. We learn here that the breaches of the wall are closed. If you remember when we first started talking about what the city looked like, there were holes everywhere. And the people gathered together, and they got together, and they weren't wall builders. They weren't masons. They were perfumers or priests. We talked about the high priest being one of the first people to start working. They were rulers. These were not people who you would consider blue-collar workers, but everyone gathered together to rebuild the wall. And they, by this time, have an honest assessment. They have closed all of the breaches of the wall. That is a huge accomplishment in and of itself. But the work's not done yet. Nehemiah tells us that the gates are still wide open. It's like if you were building your house and all the walls around the house were done, but the front door and the back door were wide open. Would you feel safe in your house? No, you wouldn't, because it's not done yet. You still got to keep going. All that's left to do is put those doors and those gates on. And that's got to feel good. There's light at the end of the tunnel. They started this work weeks ago. You know, we learn in verse 15 that they will complete the work in 52 days. It's like a month and a half, almost a full month. 52 days they completed this work. So where are we now? We're probably in the final week. They got to set the gates and set up the doors, and the work will be done. Victory is in sight. And this is when this group of enemies rises up to their last-ditch effort of desperation to try to get them to stop. They've been defeated. Never did they think it would make it this far, but they are defeated now. And this is the last-ditched effort, so they target after Nehemiah. These final tactics are pretty shady, if you ask me. They use 3 ways to oppose Nehemiah. Now, in your listening guide, you'll see that under point 1, opposition comes in the form of these 3 things. Now, there's no slide up here, so I'm just going to give them to you so that you can write them down, and then we're going to talk about each one. It comes in the form of these 3 things to Nehemiah. 1, it comes in the way of worry. They want Nehemiah to be worried. When worry doesn't work, it comes in outright lies. And then the final thing, it comes in fear. And many of you can probably relate to these 3. Because one of these 3 is probably a weak spot for one of us. Some of us are worriers. We worry. Now, this story, when we see the first way that they come, Sanballat simply says, "Come and let us meet together." In a sense, this is kind of like when somebody comes to you and says, "Hey, we really need to talk." And anytime somebody says, "Hey, we really need to talk," particularly if it's your wife, probably not going to end well for you. As a pastor, this happens more often than I would like to admit, but somebody will come and say, "Hey, pastor, I really need to talk to you." And you can tell by the tone in their voice. And I always try to ask the follow-up question, well, what is this in reference to? Oh, don't worry about it. Well, I want to talk to you about it. Well, when do you want to meet? Well, can we meet like next week? And what happens in that moment when somebody says, "Hey, I really need to talk to you. It's really important. But today is Sunday and our meeting's on Thursday. Am I going to get anything done between now and then?" No, I'm not, because I'm going to be worried about what it is. And if the person would just tell me, chances are we might not need to meet at all, but that's another story. But I'm not going to worry about it. I'm going to know. Sometimes somebody will say, "Don't worry, it's good." Then that relieves me a little bit. But how quickly somebody's good news can turn to really bad news for you. Worry. They wanted to get into his head. We need to talk. But they don't tell him what about. At least not yet. That's coming. 4 times they do this. And I love Nehemiah's response. He just disregards them. And I love what he says. He says, "I'm doing a great work. I cannot come down. I'm not going to play into your games. We've been here before. It doesn't end well for anybody. Just stop playing games. I have a job to do. I'm going to finish that job. There's nothing you can do. See, they try to get him to worry, but he's not going to buy into it. He knows that they are deceitful. He knows that they've lied before. Chapter 4 should give us all the evidence we need that he need not regard them at all. But how often in our own lives do we give credence to these people that just want to be a distraction, just want to make us worry? And how often are we willing to say, you know what? What I'm doing is more important than dealing with nonsense. Leave me alone. I'm doing a great work. I cannot come down. So when that doesn't work, they send an open letter. Now, the idea is probably the first ones were closed with a seal. This one is an open letter that anybody can read. Anybody can read. We hear about open letters to people, open letters to politicians where you post it online for the whole world to see it so they can give you your likes and your upvotes and all of that. So hopefully you can build up. So they write this letter. And this letter is interesting. It is reported. Now, it is reported as one of these things where other times people will come to you and they say, I've heard, or it's reported, or everybody is talking about this. Let me tell you what it is reported usually means. The person who wrote the letter and maybe their closest friend. They got together over coffee one day and they were talking about it. So they write out that this is what is being told. And really, we get who it is that's talking about this. It's Sanballat and this guy Geshem. They come together, they talk about it, and then they send this open letter and they say, it is reported. Well, yeah, it's reported. It's reported by them. So it is reported among the nations, and Geshem also says it, that you and the Jews intend to rebel. That is why you are building the wall. And according to these reports, you wish to become their king. Now, this is something that is just an outright lie. If you read the book of Nehemiah, you know this was never in Nehemiah's mind. But it's a pretty good lie. Because guess what? If you can put it in Nehemiah's mind that it is being reported among the nations that they intend to rebel, Nehemiah knows what will happen. There's a king up in Susa, and he sent Nehemiah there. And if that king gets it in his mind, even the slightest bit that Nehemiah has betrayed him and intends to rebel against him, he will send the full force of his army to crush the city of Jerusalem. And look how these people position themselves. They position themselves almost as like they don't believe it. Hey, come, let us take counsel together that we can refute these lies, even though they're the ones who started them. But again, Nehemiah, he doesn't care. He's not concerned with their lies. In fact, tells them, just so, you're making this up. And then, verse 9, for they all wanted to frighten us, thinking their hands will drop from their work and it will not be done. And again, I love the last part of verse 9. Nehemiah does what he always does. He prays. Oh God, strengthen my hands. A short, quick prayer. Just, your prayers don't need to be long. They don't need to be winding out with big, elegant words. Sometimes a prayer can just be, God, just help me get through the next 20 minutes. Just help me get through today. Strengthen my hands for the work that you've called me to do. Remember, Nehemiah believes he's doing a great work for God. He's not going to be derailed. So many of us fall into the trap that we need to defend ourselves, and we don't. Because the more we try to defend ourselves, the more we look guilty. Nehemiah is like, you don't know what you're talking about. That's all lies. That's not true. But I'm not going to be distracted by your gossip, your slander, and your lies. So he prays, God, strengthen our hands. We're almost done. So when worry and lies don't work, now here comes the outright intimidation, the outright fear. It's funny that they hire somebody to be a double agent. If you read this story, this reads like, something out of James Bond here. Nehemiah goes in the house of Shemaiah, son of Deliah. Anytime you go into the house, it's usually because you think that person is a friend. But all this time, Shemaiah is actually working for the enemy. He's hired. He's hired with the express purpose to plant fear in the mind of Nehemiah. Let us meet together in the house of God within the temple. Let's close the doors, for they're coming to kill you. This very night, they're coming to kill you. Now, Nehemiah is a very discerning person, because many of us, a good friend tells us this. We would say, okay, well, maybe they are coming to kill me. Maybe I should hide myself. Maybe I shouldn't allow myself to die. The work will go on. But just think about how destructive this would be to the work. Nehemiah has been the driving vision behind this all the way from the city of Susa in the presence of the king all the way here. The people have put all of their faith in God through Nehemiah's influence. When Nehemiah said, don't be afraid, keep working, they did it, even though they had to have been afraid. What would happen now if Nehemiah, who had always been faithful, always shown that he was above all of the nonsense that was going on from these people outside the walls, what if he now, in the hour of their victory, was to retreat in fear? What do you think that would do to the people on the wall? My guess is that if Nehemiah, his strength fails now, the wall is not completed. And he knows this, and he even says it. Am I one to run away? Am I one to flee because of fear? And then he also thinks like, man, who can go into the house of the Lord and live? I will not go in. And it's in that moment of obedience that he realizes that this Shemaiah guy is not who he thought he was. He was hired. He was hired to make Nehemiah afraid. At every single turn, he's able to discern the lies, the worry, the fear that is being thrown against him. He is understanding what he is doing. He is doing this great work for God. He cannot be distracted in the hour of their victory. In the hour of completion, he will not be distracted. He keeps his faith strong. And look what happens. In keeping his resolve to finish what he started, everyone around him is strengthened as well. Everyone around him, though they might be afraid, though they might feel like maybe it's time to give up, this isn't worth it, when they look to their leader who is pushing on, and they all heard the open letter. They knew what was at stake, but when they saw how their leader responded, they strengthened their hands to finish the work. The truth is, we don't always see the light at the end of the tunnel like Nehemiah did. Sometimes we're doing work. We're in a situation, we're in an experience, and it just feels like it's going to go on forever. And there's nothing we can do. Sometimes it feels like we are just at the end of our rope and we just need to quit. I remember I saw a picture online a couple of months ago, and it really spoke to me. You know, the idea is that so often we work and we work and we work, and right when we are about to break through is when we give up. Right when we're about to see the other side of this situation is when we give up and turn back. When if we could just restore our resolve just to persevere through it, man, what a payday we would have in seeing the glory of God. Those of us who have come out of these strong situations of just feeling like we just can't go on, yet we persevere knowing that we are doing a good work for God, and we break through. Keep going, persevere, don't give up. Now, there are things that we should be striving for. There are things that we should be doing, and there are things that we should be quitting. There are things that we're doing and striving after that are of no benefit to us. How do you know the difference? between what you should be doing and what you shouldn't be doing. You know, life is not always as easy of a decision as, should I rob a bank today or should I go to church? And it doesn't matter how much of that money you're going to steal you promised to give to North Hills, it's still not a good idea. Sometimes it's not that easy. Sometimes there's a lot of good things in our lives that are vying for our attention. There's a lot of good works that we could be doing. How do you choose? How do you choose between cutting your front grass because your wife asked you to, or sitting down with a neighbor and building that relationship with the purpose of leading them to Jesus? How do you choose? And here's the thing. I think sometimes opposition can serve as evidence that we're on the right track. Sometimes the opposition that we face is evidence that we are doing a good work. And as Christians, we should be doing what causes us to become more like Jesus in loving people more, pointing them to Him more, and just resting in the finished work He did on the cross. You see, the work that we do, the work that Nehemiah is doing is not going to save him. It's not going to earn him favor with God. And the work that we do in the name of Jesus today does not get us to heaven. In fact, that actually gives us one less thing to worry about when we just rest in Jesus' finished work on the cross. We don't have to work hard enough to earn God's favor. We don't have to make up for the mistakes that we've made in the past. All we need to do is just simply be faithful in what God has tasked us to do now. We're told in Matthew 28 what we're supposed to do, the Great Commission. You see, Jesus finished work at the cross, but that opened up more work for those He left behind. To go into all the nations and to preach the gospel, to make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, teaching them all that Jesus commanded, and remembering that He is with us always, even to the end of the age. You see, Jesus did the most important work of all. What we need to do is just point people to that work. You'll find opposition. But it seems that the moment we are ready to give up is the moment of our breakthrough. That person that we think, man, I've been sharing like life and faith with them. The moment we give up on them might have been the very moment that they turn their life over to Jesus. Your job is simply to keep persevering regardless of the opposition, regardless of the consequences. Trusting in God. Remember, we want to trust God. So Nehemiah persevered through the opposition because he believed that what he was doing and for whom he was doing it was greater than the opposition that came his way. So what happens next? Let's keep reading, and we'll read verse 15 and close out the chapter. So the wall was finished on the 25th day of the month of Elul in 52 days. And when all of our enemies heard of it, all the nations around us were afraid and fell greatly in their own esteem, for they perceived that this work had been accomplished with the help of our God. Moreover, in those days, the nobles of Judah sent many letters to Tobiah, and Tobiah's letters came to them. For many in Judah were bound by oath to him, because he was the son-in-law of Shechaniah, the son of Erah. And his son, Johanan, had taken the daughter of Meshullam, the son of Berechiah, as his wife. Also, they spoke of his good deeds in my presence and reported my words to him. And Tobiah sent letters to make me afraid. You see, Nehemiah had a resolve that he was going to finish what he started. He didn't care who came against him because he was convinced in his mind, and God had pretty much revealed this to him over time. This is what you're supposed to do. So he believed that if God was with him, there was nobody that was going to stop him. And some of us, we can kind of doubt that sometimes. We believe that what we are doing is for God, but we believe that somehow somebody around us can somehow derail what God has put in our hearts. And we need to be reminded that God is in control, and God will not allow the work that he has for us to be derailed. The enemy might think that he won. Satan thought he won at the cross, but 3 days later, look who was laughing then. We need to have a resolve to finish. We need to have this resolve to finish. Now, Nehemiah, with perseverance and focus and leading the people to do the same thing, they finished the wall in 52 days. Now, right now, this is just a hallelujah, amen, because this is, wow. Can you imagine those people? The perfumers and the goldsmiths, the priests and the rulers. 52 days, they finished this great project that nobody said that they could do. When you finish something that you start, when you work together as a group and you finish what you start, it is a huge morale boost to everyone who was a part of it. They had to be feeling good about the work that they had done. They had to feel when they walked around the wall that they could point out, I worked on that, I did that. And years later, when their children and their grandchildren saw it, they would say, I built that. And guess what? It's still standing. I know, surprising. It's still standing. Your grandfather built that, and it's still standing. But yeah, it's still standing. They had to feel great about the resolve they had to finish. But guess what it did to those who were doubters, or those who were enemies, the Sanballats, the Tobiahs, and the Geshems? They were greatly afraid. They were defeated. You see, when you do a good work that only could have been done with the help of God, only could have been done because God was leading you in it, the doubters have to eat their words. They have to eat crow. It affects them. And to this point, they are completely discouraged and defeated. And I find it interesting that after this, there's only one person still being a nuisance, Tobiah. Sanballat and Geshem are gone. He seems to be gone, but somehow Tobiah is still working to try to intimidate it. And what's interesting about it is it seems at first like Tobiah is trying to weasel his way into Nehemiah's good standing. He's like that person that watches the NBA Finals, and then in the NBA Finals decides who's going to win, decides which jersey they're going to buy after the series is over, after who wins. This used to happen in middle school and high school all the time. Super Bowls. Whoever won that next week, every kid would have some jersey for that winning team, even if it was like some other team from across the country, like the Cowboys. It's like, ugh. But that's just what happens. You pick you pick a side based on who wins. And it seems like Tobiah is now trying to weasel his way back into the good graces of Nehemiah because Nehemiah has proved that he was actually right all along. And he gets people. And we can see that what's coming. In the city of Jerusalem, there's some double-minded people here. People that want to see the good things, but also are, they feel some obligation to some of the other people. So what happens? Tobiah sends letters. The nobles of Judah send letters. They speak good deeds of Tobiah in the presence. Like they're trying to build him up like, Nehemiah, maybe you were a little wrong about this Tobiah guy. As though Nehemiah could forget about the last 52 days. The last, few months as this guy Tobiah has just relentlessly come against him. Like he's going to forget that. Now there are some people that will say that Nehemiah erred here. He erred in wrongly excluding Sanballat and Tobiah. That he was somehow unfair to them by not including them. But here's what the truth is that the Bible never says that. All the Bible ever talks about Sanballat and Tobiah is that they are evil, deceitful people that are bent on thwarting Nehemiah at every single turn. Their actions are speaking louder than words. Now, what's interesting is I think this gives us a little insight to what will happen a few hundred years later in the time of Jesus. You see, Sanballat is a Samaritan. And at the time that they're rebuilding the walls, the Samaritan people are largely antagonistic towards the Jewish people. They treat them with great derision. They speak very ill of them constantly. They thought they were better than them because they weren't deported into exile. So the idea that when Jesus comes around, the hatred that the Jewish people have for the Samaritans finds its origin in the story of Nehemiah. And that, of course, is the irony of the story of the Good Samaritan. A Good Samaritan person who is willing to stoop to lift a finger to help a Jewish man in need. It's unheard of because they hated each other. It's not difficult to see that these two were not misunderstood. That if Nehemiah could just see from their perspective that he would change his mind and include them. No, Nehemiah had resolved to finish this wall, and he was going to do it, and he was not going to soften his stance towards these unrepentant sinners. Now, if they had come in humility, if they had come, even Tobiah after the fact, I messed up big time. You were right all along. God was with you. I'm so sorry. I will serve you. You are the governor. I'm sorry. I'm sure they would have been let in, but that's not what happened. In fact, the opposite happened. Tobiah continues to try to intimidate by weaseling his way in. We haven't heard the last of Tobiah. We'll hear from him in a couple more chapters. Now, they finished this wall, a great accomplishment. And I've found in my own life that it's easy to finish projects than it is to finish them. Some of you, my guess is you might have a bookshelf with 15 or 20 books with bookmarks in them, of books you might have started but not finished. Well, for me, when Amanda and I bought our house in Livermore, it was really, really a pretty disgusting house. I mean, there was no floors in it. The kitchen was falling down. We had to sweep up cockroaches because they tented the place and killed everything, but just left it all just there. It was a short sale, and just the people that were selling it had no care in the world for it at all. They just wanted it gone. So we, of course, moved in, swept up the cockroaches, and began the project of finishing that house and making it livable. And for the first couple months, we were on target. We put floors down. We replaced the kitchen. It was great. But towards the end, as the ending of that project neared, I won't bring my wife in this, I got a little content with just a half-finished kitchen. So when did I finish the kitchen? The week before we put it on the market to sell it. Never got to enjoy it. But that's the truth. It's so easy to start projects, and it's very difficult to finish them. And in the case of Nehemiah, he finished what he started. How much greater is the work of God than home renovations? Finish what you start. Build relationships with people. But finish the deal by telling them about Jesus. A lot of times people want to come to church, but they don't want to finish the deal of joining the church and saying, I will be a part of that church. Sometimes when we have people in our lives, we'll invite people to church. But when they say no, we give up. When we know that, studies tell us that sometimes you need to invite somebody 5 times before they'll actually come. Continue. Don't be annoying, but continue to invite again and again. Nehemiah was focused on the good work of God, and he put that before anything else. He would not be distracted. We can't be distracted by the work. We can't be distracted in the face of the work that God has given us to do. So what great work has God given you to do? Maybe it's in the church. Maybe it's a ministry that you need to go full on into. Maybe it's a relationship that you need to build with the point of leading that person, that neighbor, that friend, that family member to Jesus. Is it going on a mission trip? Like the one in China right now, some of you are like, I will not go to across the seas. You don't have to go. You can go down the street. Vallejo in this area is one of the most diverse places in the world. Jesus said, go into all the world. Well, guess what? The whole world came to us. We don't have to go across the world. We can just go across the street. Is it being generous with your money? Think of the work that God has called you to do, but then think about what are the distractions that get in the way of the work that you need to resolve to persevere through, that you need to be resolved to finish that work. Who are the opponents of worry, of lies, of fear? And who is watching you? Because the truth is, somebody's always watching. When we face opposition, they're watching how we're going to handle it. They're watching, and a lot of times it's our children, but a lot of times it's somebody else in the church that's going through exactly what you're going through. And when they see that you can go through it and come out on the other side, they're strengthened to do the same. How will you model faith in such a way that when you persevere, those who are watching you are strengthened to do the same as well? But let's not also forget that you are a work in progress as well. I'm always encouraged by Philippians 1:6 when Paul tells us, and I am sure of this, that he who began a good work in you will bring it to completion at the day of Jesus Christ. God has begun a work in you, and he is going to see it to the finish. Because God finishes what he starts, and if he starts a work in you, you can bet that he is going to finish it. But guess what? We're told here that it likely won't be until the day that Jesus returns, when we get our rewards. So don't give up. Keep persevering. Even Nehemiah had growing to do, but his perseverance and faith did something that he probably didn't intend. It strengthened the perseverance and faith of a nation. So our reflection this morning is, in what ways does your perseverance, does your faith, does your resolve restore the faith, the perseverance, and the resolve of others? Nehemiah finished the work that he set out to do. And I can imagine that he, when it was all done, could cry out, "It is finished." And somebody else cried out, "It is finished" too. On the cross, when Jesus paid our debt and finished our salvation. Jesus faced great opposition to what he was going to do. And the point is that the opposition was the point. The Pharisees and the Sadducees coming against Jesus wasn't evidence that he shouldn't have been doing what he was doing, but it was evidence that he needed to keep going because he was always going to die on the cross. And with that finished work, he didn't found a nation, but he founded a people. He founded a church, and that's what we're a part of today. And we are commanded to continue that work. There are many countries where the Bible is illegal, where they meet like this in rooms and they are in fear of their very lives, fearing somebody's going to knock down the door, drag them off to jail, persecute them. But what I find interesting is that in those nations where it's illegal to be a Christian, those are the nations where the gospel is flourishing and people are coming to Jesus at an alarming rate. Because when people are resolved to suffer for the name of Jesus, people look and wonder, why are they willing to suffer for the sake of this Jesus? And that's when they say, "Tell me more." And we tell them more, and they see that, yeah, this Jesus is worth everything that we face, everything we struggle with, every opposition that comes our way. He's worth it, even up to giving our own lives. So it is not a bad thing to have opposition. It's what you do with it. So will you persevere and finish the work that God has put before you? Thank you for watching. We hope this message has encouraged you as you seek to love God, serve others, and change the world. Check us out on our website And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel in order to receive more updates and resources from North Hills. God bless.